Welcome to Creation in the 21st Century. I'm your host, Carl Ball, founder and director of the Creation Evidence Museum in Glen Rose, Texas. The title to today's program applies to the issues at hand. The title is The Evidence Disputes Darwin. There's a reason for that title. We're caught up in the global propaganda, the academic posture that Darwinism is the answer for life origins, the progression of living systems, and the explanation of the entire universe. But the evidence disputes that concept. Charles Darwin had some major problems. In fact, first of all, problem of plagiarism. The very thing that he is noted for in the publication of The Origin of Species, and by the way, The Origin of Species has nothing to do with settling the issue of the origin of species. It simply talks about species, and it gives no explanation for the origin of anything, living systems from inorganic material, or the progression of new information producing a higher order. There's no evidence whatsoever. In fact, the very thing he is given credit for, natural selection, was not his idea at all. In previous telecasts, I've talked about the fact that he borrowed from Anaximander in ancient Greek history. He borrowed from the Babylonians in Enuma Elish with the concept of naturalistic material being able to produce living systems, and those living systems having the potential to graduate to higher forms and ultimately produce man. Well, Benjamin Franklin, professor of anthropology and the history of science, Lawrence C. Elsley, the late Dr. Elsley, published data showing that actually the production of the concept not only of variation, the struggle for existence, natural selection, and sexual selection was published years before Darwin by a creationist naturalist, and explained that natural selection preserves the integrity of the species so we don't get any bizarre concepts within the genetic code. And his position was that the genetic code already was in place, the information was in place. Darwin plagiarized the concept, but the evidence supports creation rather than evolution. This is the year of Darwin, announced so worldwide. We have various publications that I've mentioned on previous telecasts: Scientific American, Science, Nature, National Geographic, and here we have Science with a major publication on origins, honoring, of course, the 200th year of the birthday of Charles Darwin. In fact, it's carried so far that a Harvard geneticist, and I have great respect for geneticists, I have great respect for individuals involved in any academic discipline. I have great respect for Harvard, and unfortunately, John Harvard, who established that great institution to train young theologians to read the Bible in the original languages and to search out the history of planet Earth and to search out what might be found philosophically, John Harvard named, and I have visited the complex, named the first 4 men's dormitories Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Yet today, that great university is anything but a bastion for the defense of basic truth, that is, the truth of the Bible, even a reference and an accountability to God. Dr. Lowenstein, one of the brilliant geneticists at Harvard, Dr. Richard Lowenstein, stated recently in print, "It is not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world." Now wait a minute. But I thought in this year of Darwin, giving accolades to a man who plagiarized the very concepts and distorted the very concepts so that it would match with a naturalistic framework, I thought the publication stated, well, Science has determined that evolution is true. No, these publications simply announce that evolution is true, and all the evidence they use for naturalistic evolution is variation within genetic boundaries. In fact, our own experiments at the Creation Evidence Museum in the hyperbaric biosphere has demonstrated that the so-called junk DNA that now turns out not to be junk at all actually helps to program the way the proteins are expressed if you vary the ecosphere or the atmospheric, the geologic context demonstrates this. If you vary the context, you get a boundary. Within boundary, you get a slightly different expression of the proteins. For instance, in the geologic record, in the fossil record, you have proboscidea. Now, that's the elephant kind with a proboscis extension. You have the standard elephant, you have the mammoths, you have the mastodons, and then you have the tetralophodon mastodon with 4 tusks. Now, the 2 smaller tusks underneath actually are for rooting and grubbing. So within the elephant kind, the proboscidea, you have the genetic expression potential to meet the needs of the ecosphere in which they find themselves. That's all a part of the design. Now, back to Dr. Lowenstein, a world-class geneticist. He said, it is not that the evidence and the experimental science drive us to conclude that evolutionary naturalism is a mandate. He said rather, and I think this is a surprise, will be a surprise to most in the audience today. But on the contrary, these are his words in print, that we are forced by our a priori adherence, our preconceived notion, to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and a set of concepts that produce natural explanations, no matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated. Moreover, that materialism is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. Only a fool would discount God in the intervention of life. In fact, I'm reminded of a tremendous statement by the late Dr. W.A. Criswell. Dr. Criswell was a brilliant theologian, pastor of the First Baptist Church in Dallas, Texas for long decades. He was a brilliant philosopher and a theologian as well, and a great defender of the veracity of the Bible. He was preaching on the reliability and inerrancy of the Bible on one occasion, and a man handed a note to an usher. Dr. Criswell was accustomed to having notes sent up to the platform. Right in the middle of the message, the usher handed the note. And the note simply said, "Fool." Dr. Criswell aptly stated, well, that's amazing. I've received many notes over the years, and the individual didn't sign his name. But this is astounding. Here, the man signed his name without writing the note. And the fool was not Dr. Criswell. It was an individual who tried to rule God out of the affairs of man, and especially the written word of the living God. In this year of Darwin, individuals have gone so far, having now assumed that they have removed any opposite concept, any critique of evolutionary theory and methodology, any critique of the fossil evidence. Underway is a move to actually remove any discussion in the public classroom and, as far as possible, in the public audience